Age of Hypocrisy, Part 1. How outrage fuels contradiction and why we keep falling for it. There's a certain irony in watching religious institutions preach about morality while systematically excusing some of the most immoral behavior imaginable. We've been told loudly, repeatedly, and with righteous indignation that being gay is unnatural, that trans people are ruining society, and that any deviation from traditional values is an affront to God Himself. Meanwhile, these same institutions have spent decades covering up widespread sexual abuse, laundering money, and protecting corrupt leaders, all while wagging their fingers at the so-called sins of the modern world. Even the very book they claim to follow warns against such hypocrisy. Why do you look at the speck of sawdust in your brother's eye and pay no attention to the plank in your own eye? Matthew 7:3. Funny how that part rarely makes it into the sermon. But here's the thing. Hypocrisy alone isn't enough to keep people engaged. Outrage is, and outrage, my friends, is profitable. Politicians, religious figures, and media personalities don't just stumble into hypocrisy. They lean into it because they know we will react. They know that the quickest way to keep people distracted from their own failings is to throw a scandal in their direction. It's a game of manufactured villainy, stoking fear, division, and moral panic, so that we're too busy being angry at each other to notice who's actually screwing us over. This is rage bait in its purest form. It's the reason why the same people who preach about protecting children will spend more time banning books than addressing abuse scandals within their own institutions. It's why politicians will spend entire news cycles fuming about woke culture while quietly passing laws that strip away basic rights. And it's why media outlets will push outrage over nuance. Because nuance doesn't sell, but rage does. And we keep falling for it. Rage bait in politics, a bipartisan circus. In the intricate dance of political theater, hypocrisy often takes center stage, with rage bait as its choreographer. Politicians across the spectrum have mastered the art of stoking outrage to distract from their own contradictions, manipulating public sentiment to maintain power and control. The Republican Party frequently decries the so-called dangers of woke culture, advocating for traditional values and freedom of expression. Yet paradoxically, they have been at the forefront of implementing book bans and imposing speech restrictions in educational institutions. This selective censorship underscores a willingness to suppress ideas that challenge their narrative, all while championing free speech. On the other side, the Democratic Party often positions itself as a champion of economic equality and corporate accountability. However, instances of Democratic lawmakers engaging in stock trading, potentially leveraging privileged information, highlight a stark contradiction. For example, former House Speaker Nancy Pelosi and her husband have faced scrutiny for their significant stock market activities, leading to allegations of insider trading. This behavior not only undermines public trust, but also contradicts the party's professed commitment to economic fairness. Both parties have a history of orchestrating crises to divert attention from pressing policy failures. For instance, extensive hearings on the personal affairs of political figures often overshadow substantive discussions on policy shortcomings and issues. And how does hypocrisy and rage bait work together? Politicians need not maintain consistency in their positions. Instead, they capitalize on generating sufficient outrage to rally their base. By amplifying divisive issues, they create an environment where supporters are more inclined to overlook contradictions and ethical lapses within their own ranks. This strategy fosters a climate of us versus them, where the perceived transgressions of the opposing side are magnified to eclipse internal inconsistencies. Transgender athletes in sports, the convenient concern for women's sports. Interestingly, certain politicians and media figures have suddenly become deeply invested in the integrity of women's sports, because up until now, they didn't seem to care much at all. The recent bans on transgender women competing in female sports have been framed as a matter of fairness and protecting female athletes. Yet the same people pushing these restrictions have remained noticeably silent on actual issues plaguing women's sports. If protecting women's sports was truly the priority, we'd see just as much passion behind stopping abuse, closing the pay gap, and investing in female athletes as we do in banning transgender women from competing. But that's not what this is really about, is it? As trans activist and athlete Skylar Bilar put it, if they really cared about protecting women's sports, they would be fighting for pay equity. They would be fighting to end abuse in sports. They would be fighting for more resources and support, but they're not. They're only here when they can use women's sports as a political weapon. This isn't about fairness. It's about manufactured outrage designed to distract from real problems. Transgender athletes are simply the latest scapegoat in a long history of politicians, using culture wars to rile up their base while ignoring the actual needs of the people they claim to protect. Religious hypocrisy, a shield, not a guide. Let's get one thing straight. Church and state are supposed to be separate. That's not just a suggestion, it's literally in the First Amendment. And yet we're watching certain politicians and religious figures bulldoze that wall with increasing confidence, wrapping government policy in Bible verses while claiming to defend religious freedom. But whose religious freedom are they actually protecting? Under Trump's administration, we saw the rise of Christian nationalism, the idea that America should be governed according to Christian doctrine. Trump capitalized on this by establishing a presidential commission on religious liberty, led by evangelical leaders who focused almost exclusively on Christian concerns. He signed executive orders targeting so-called anti-Christian bias while largely ignoring documented discrimination against Muslims, Jews, and other religious groups. Meanwhile, he surrounded himself with religious advisors like Pastor Paula White Cain, who openly advocated for policies that blurred the line between faith and governance, reinforcing the idea that religious liberty only applies when it serves a specific political agenda. If the concern was really religious liberty, then where were these leaders when Muslim Americans faced surveillance programs, or when Jewish communities dealt with rising anti-Semitism? The hypocrisy is blatant. Religious freedom is only a rallying cry when it benefits their version of Christianity. As Christian writer and pastor John Pavlovitz put it, when you say religious freedom, what you really mean is Christian privilege. You don't want a nation of religious liberty. You want a theocracy that caters to your specific faith and punishes anyone who doesn't fall in line. Of course, none of this works without rage bait, because Christian nationalism isn't just about religion. It's about creating an enemy to rally against. For example, the War on Christmas narrative comes up every December, where certain media outlets claim that liberals are trying to cancel Christmas, despite literally nobody doing that. Meanwhile, the real issue, corporations commercializing the holiday and exploiting workers during the season of giving, gets conveniently ignored. While Christianity is still the dominant religion in the US, right-wing religious figures push the idea that Christians are under attack, using isolated incidents, like Starbucks changing their holiday cup design, to stir outrage and push persecution propaganda. Weaponizing LGBTQ+ rights, opposing gay marriage, attacking trans people, religious leaders repeatedly frame equality as an attack on their faith, despite the fact that not everyone follows their religion to begin with. If faith is about compassion, why is so much time spent policing other people's lives rather than, say, helping the poor or advocating for social justice? Jesus, as explained in the Bible, spent time with the outcasts of society, yet modern religious leaders are more focused on controlling women's bodies and blocking LGBTQ+ rights. The hypocrisy isn't just glaring, it's their entire strategy. Why this hypocrisy matters. Religious institutions have long been centers of moral authority, but when faith becomes just another political weapon, it loses its credibility. People are leaving organized religion in record numbers not because they've lost faith in spirituality, but because they're tired of watching religious leaders defend corruption while condemning ordinary people. Faith-based morality has become a tool of control rather than a guide for compassion. If politicians and pastors spent less time policing people's identities and more time living the values they claim to preach, maybe we wouldn't be watching an exodus from religious institutions. We've covered how politicians and religious leaders have perfected the art of outrage, using hypocrisy as a weapon while keeping their supporters too distracted to notice the contradictions. But they aren't the only ones profiting off rage bait. The manipulation runs even deeper, from so-called health freedom fighters to media corporations that don't actually care about the truth, only about keeping you emotionally hooked. Part 2 is coming soon, where we'll dive into the health and wellness industry's hypocrisy, the dangerous misinformation pipeline, and why the media profits from keeping us divided. Because if outrage is a game, it's clear that every major player is in on the scam.